Hi guys, I'm back. I want to talk a little bit more about the relationship between JD Tippit and Lee Harvey Oswald a little bit more and expand our knowledge altogether about how we know that this scenario about JD Tippit being used as a look-alike corpse for JFK really worked. And let's just, I want to share with you how I got to understand how this works from Lee's perspective and how Lee worked it out. Okay, so we know, don't we, that that JD and Lee were due to meet each other at the Top 10 record store just before 1 o'clock. We actually believed that the ambush delivery point was going to be 1 o'clock. So for JD to rush into the Top 10 record store in a frantic panic at 1 o'clock, he was probably already minutes behind schedule at that point. He clearly was supposed to meet Lee there. Lee is not there. He's in a panic. He doesn't really know what next to do. Okay, so we believe he made a phone call. We know he made a phone call. And I personally believe he made a phone call to the house at 10th and Patton, where he then next drives to. Because I believe that house is significant. I believe that there is something going on in that house that we perhaps haven't got to the bottom of yet. But it's something along the lines of drug trafficking or gun running, and maybe even Tippit's secret mistress was involved there as well. We know her name is Maxie Weatherspoon, and the neighbours had said that Tippit's car was often there, so he was part of that neighbourhood scene, as it were. He was very familiar with that house and that area. Okay, so we know then that these two men were due to meet at this Top 10 record store. Lee does not show up, and Lee doesn't show up because he works out what's going on here, and I'm going to tell you what I believe he worked out so that he could avoid this setup again. Okay, so we know, don't we, that Lee went into the Top 10 record store twice during the morning prior to the assassination, and at both points he collects or buys a ticket, both times, one ticket each time, to Caravan of the Stars, which is a show that's going to be shown in Dallas later that evening, which there's no way he's going to be able to attend that. That's not the plan. He's not doing it because he's going to attend it. Absolutely not. So these tickets then must mean something else. Now, I feel that once we've got Lee in that record store the second time and JD Tippit is there and he's seeing JD for another eyeball meet, the penny drops for Lee. Okay, and this is what I feel is happening. Lee buys those tickets. He puts them in his pocket, but they are not later found when he's taken into custody. So at some point he ditches those tickets because they're no longer needed. Now, I've come to the conclusion that those tickets were a signal, and the signal is very significant. We know, don't we, that Tippit was driving down the road, and the intersection of 10th and Patton is where he was. He got out of the car and he was shot at that point. If he'd have carried on driving down that same road, eventually, further down the road, he would have come to a cafe, okay? I think it's called something like the Town and Country Cafe. And but there is another account of a witness seeing an Oswald lookalike coming towards that cafe just prior to 1 o'clock in the other direction. Now, our research leads us to believe that that Oswald lookalike is deliberately headed to that cafe, okay? And his name is Larry Crawford. Now, Larry worked for Jack Ruby in his club. So Ruby and Crawford are like this, okay? and clearly they are, in whatever's unfolding here, very close together. Initially, I believed that en route to Redbird, the plan was that Lee would visit Ruby at his apartment, which was also in Oak Cliff, to collect a small satchel-like black bag. Because in my mind, it's impossible to run away and escape and start your life afresh with absolutely nothing, okay? You need clean pants, socks, things. You just need things. Just a few things, just to just kind of tide you over the first couple of days. You just need that. And it seems clear that one of the things that Lee took out of the garage at Ruth Payne's, along with the trousers the night before on the Thursday the 21st, was in fact a black bag. Now, I believe that black bag, he put the black bag and the trousers into the Nash Rambler. The trousers stayed in the Nash Rambler, but the black bag didn't. I believe he gave that to Jack Ruby at 2 o'clock in the morning at the diner where they were meeting early hours, and Ruby was going to safekeep that for him. So initially I believe that Ruby would have taken that to his apartment, stowed it away, and then the plan was that the plan was that Lee had been told that JD and himself would drive to Ruby's apartment, pick up the bag, maybe some cash at that point, and then drive off to Redbird. And I believe that for a time. And now having researched what I've researched about other things, I come to a different conclusion. If we look at the map, we can clearly see that further along the road where Tippit was headed is this cafe. And we've got an Oswald impersonator, Larry Crawford, who is Ruby's associate, walking in the other direction, roughly in the same time frame. Okay? So what's happening is, I feel that Ruby, having been to Parkland, drives to this cafe, all right? Maybe the other way around. And the idea is that the meat is going to be there. That's what they tell Lee, okay? And that's probably what they tell Tippit as well. But in actual fact, what is happening here is that these people are in a public place. The killing of Tippit is very, very deliberate, okay? These people that killed Tippit, and we'll talk about them in a minute, are very much placed as assassins for Tippit, for his corpse. And so when they have shot Tippit in the head and run from the scene, they go to the cafe. All right, now, let's just back up a minute. I believe that the killers of JD Tippit are Roscoe White and Gary Marlowe, and they are both CIA operatives. Roscoe White was a Dallas policeman, but he'd only been employed by the Dallas police since the 7th of October 1963, so not very long. And he'd actually been in the Marines, and he was actually a trained killer, and he was actually on CIA business. So my belief is that this man had been seconded in specifically for the purpose. He did some other things as well surrounding the assassination, which I don't want to go into right now. We'll talk about that in another video. But certainly, Roscoe White was a trained assassin. Roscoe White was on the grassy knoll during the assassination. Roscoe White fired into President Kennedy's skull. There is no question about that. And JD Tippit was present on the knoll during that. All right. So, JD Tippit knows that Roscoe has done this. And in actual fact, there's a witness to say that JD Tippit was crying on the knoll. Because JD, let's face it, was probably a regular guy, a regular policeman. To see that kind of thing in front of you is very, very shocking indeed. It would make a grown man cry, I believe, if you've got, you know, no kind of idea that might be something that you're going to have to deal with in the moment. JD then goes behind the Texas Book Depository and is directing traffic. Very possibly he has been tasked with allowing vehicles in and out and allowing safe passage for some of the teams to move in and out from the Texas School Book College, safe passage for the shooters, basically. So we can see from this scenario that JD is roped right in. JD himself is part of this unfolding plan, this plot. So it's my belief that JD Tippit was involved, but they placed him in what was called an abort team, but was actually a phony abort team, and they gave him tasks to do, and in actual fact that team could be restated as a Get Tippit team. That's really what its purpose was, a Get Tippit team. Okay, so what we've got is a situation where we've got JD in the knowledge of what's gone on. Right, so he knows now that he is tasked with delivering Lee Harvey Oswald to that house at 10th and Patton. So he's in a panic, remember. He gets back in his car from the Top 10 record store, can't find Lee. Hurriedly drives to 10th and Patton at the ambush spot, gets out of the car, sees Roscoe, who he knows, and says to Roscoe, well, what he's doing, of course, is he's leaning over, isn't he, to the curbside, and he's winding his window down right over. Can't see him. But of course, because you're leaning over a seat here, the person on the outside of the car isn't going to be able to hear you very well. And he's in a panic. So what he does is he gets out of his car. And at that point, Roscoe, boo, 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 boo. Okay, well, Gary Marlowe actually shoots him 3 times. And then when he's on the ground, Roscoe shoots him in the head. Okay, and that is a coup de grace. Okay, now we had to have, of course, that headshot. Right, so I believe they sent 2 assassins in, Marlowe and Roscoe, because there were going to be 2 people that needed to be killed. Right? It was going to be Tippit and it was going to be Oswald. So you had 1 gunman for each person. To make it look like this Western-style shootout, of course. But that didn't happen. So Tippit gets out of the car, Marlowe rushes up, shoots him, then then Roscoe stands over Tippit and shoots him again in the head. They run off. I believe now that Roscoe runs to Ruby in the cafe down the road. He gets back into his grey Plymouth and he gassed it out of there, and he goes to the cafe. Now, the plan's gone a little bit awry here because Oswald is still alive. Nobody's killed Oswald. So how are they going to communicate this in a public place? You can't go in there and start shouting in front of all the, you know, the people eating their lunch and watching the TV screens and drinking their coffee. We weren't successful, we were all of that. They can't do that. So what they do, what the plan is they're going to produce 2 tickets from Lee's dead body from Caravan of the Stars, right? So 1 ticket means that Tippit is dead. 2 tickets means Lee and Tippit is dead. No tickets means Oswald is still alive. Right? Do you see how that works? You can't have any tickets because Oswald hasn't shown up. There's no tickets to retrieve out of his dead body. Right? Do you see what I mean? So they had to have a way of communicating this. They had to know that Tippit was dead. They had to know that Oswald was dead. And they don't get that. Right. So that's the story behind the tickets. It was a signal to take out a Lee. And that is what Lee understands in that Top 10 record store. That is what he puts together. That is what he understands. And that is why he never showed up. He was clever enough to come to that conclusion that I've worked on and come to that conclusion myself. And that is why he bailed. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? Because you're going to know that you're going to be walking into your ambush situation where you're going to be killed, and another person's going to be killed, and they're going to put the blame on you doubly. So you're going to do something that you need to do. And that is why I believe that we have Lee Harvey Oswald having a conversation in Spanish at the Tidy Lady Laundrette at 1 p.m. to someone we don't know. We think probably Dave Atlee Phillips. And he was agitated because he understands now that he's been set up again, and it's all coming down. Okay, so Ruby is in this big time. Make no mistake about that. Jack Ruby is in this big time. Jack Ruby has set this thing in motion on the ground. He is like the kingpin. He knows all the angles, and he knows all the players of everything. So Roscoe comes in, sits down at the table, looks across, no tickets. That means Oswald's still alive. So without saying a word, nothing is said. They know for sure that Lee Harvey Oswald is still alive, okay? And they know ahead of time that plan B is going to be that Lee is going to be in the theatre. That's going to be his next point of contact, because it's already planned out in advance. If something goes wrong, Lee's to go to the theatre. Ruby knows this, okay, and Lee is definitely, that's where he's going to be. So what happens next is Larry and Ruby get in the car, probably the Ford Falcon, okay, probably that Ford Falcon, and they drive to the theatre. And then Larry takes on Oswald imposter role. He loiters outside Johnny Brewer's shoe shop. Now, Johnny Brewer, the manager of that shoe shop, was covering for a colleague who was sick that day, or was certainly not at work that day. And I believe that Johnny Brewer had connections with Ruby ahead of time, and they had planned that, or Ruby had gone in there and bribed him and said, we want you to notice this man loitering outside, looks suspicious, watch and see what he does. So Johnny Brewer comes out of his shoe shop and watches Larry walk into the theatre and dodge in, and without paying a ticket, and alerts the staff there. Now, let's just think about that scenario. This is an afternoon where we've got the President of the United States dead, and we've got a police officer dead, and the Dallas police are going to take this seriously about somebody not paying a theatre ticket. Get out of here. That's ridiculous, right? It has to be. That's just everything else, which is not of any kind of police value, of that afternoon is just going to go by the wayside. Somebody not paying a ticket for a film, well, it's just nothing. I mean, it's nothing on an ordinary day, let alone this day of days. What would happen is the management would simply go and apprehend the person and say, oi, you haven't paid your ticket, pay your money or leave. And they'd get the security heavies or whoever, two of the strong, cinema lads, to haul the person out if they didn't pay. And that really would be the end of it. And certainly on a day like that, there would be no way in the world the police would respond to that kind of thing. But they do respond to that kind of thing because it's all set in advance. Okay, so Larry has gone upstairs. Okay, Larry has gone upstairs to the balcony, slipped in, and he's gone upstairs to the balcony. Oswald is arrested on the stools, and Ruby slips in behind in that theatre and is watching everything that's going on. So Jack Ruby, posing as Lee's longtime friend and confidant and the person that's arranging his escape, is actually somebody that the conspirators are using to set him up so much. And Lee of course is none the wiser to this. Lee's none the wiser to this at all at this point. So we've got this situation of Larry going in there, and of course the police come in, and we know that Oswald is arrested at 1:50. And we've got witnesses that say that Lee is in that theatre by about 6 minutes past 1. So there is no way that he can possibly have been at the scene of Tippit's murder, which happened, there's there are different accounts, but we're saying somewhere between 1:13, 1:16, something like that. That kind of time. In any case, Lee was not at the scene of Tippit's murder. Absolutely not, because he was in that theatre within 4 or 5 minutes of him making that phone call at the Tidy Lady Laundry. It's only a stone's throw. Okay, it's 3 blocks maybe, not even that to get there. And the Top 10 record store is on the same road here, Jefferson, as the theatre. So we can see it's all in the same kind of vicinity. They planned all of this out in advance. So Tippit is laying on the ground. Now you would think, wouldn't you, that this is a crime scene now, an officer down. And in that scenario, even in 1963, that crime scene needs to be preserved. And that body needs to be photographed in situ, and questions need to be asked, and all of the rest of it. But no. They have got the Dudley Hughes Funeral Home to remove that body and take it to Parkland. And the call comes in around about 18 minutes past 1, 20 past 1, something like that. That body is actually removed from the scene before the police even arrive, because they had to get that body sorted out and onto Air Force 2 very, very quickly to be able to do the body swap. Okay, incidentally, that is why we've got LBJ on Air Force 1 insisting that everybody come forward to the front of the plane to see his swearing in. A judge had to be found to be able to do the swearing in ceremony. LBJ planned this out completely. He had Jackie stand next to him for no other reason than he wanted her to be away from her husband's body while they did this switch. All right. He even had the words to the ceremony in his coat pocket. I mean, who carries that about? That's suspicious for a start, isn't it? And all of this takes time. They were on board this aeroplane for maybe an hour and a half, or maybe a bit longer before they could take off. They couldn't take off until these things had been completed. Every aspect of this was covered. On the early news that went out, straight away really, on the media, there was early reports of another Secret Service agent being killed on the Knoll. It only went out once or twice, and when we looked into that, we understand that to be a true thing. That the guy, there was a guy who was killed on the Knoll. We don't know the details of how and who, not yet, but he was definitely killed, and there was a pool of blood on the Knoll which was cleared up very, very quickly. And Hugh Ainsworth, a media guy from Dallas, tried to tell us that was soda pop. That's ridiculous. It was definitely blood. It was cleaned up straight away. Now, they needed to have another person killed, and then they kept very quiet about it. And the reason that they needed a third person killed was because they didn't want to get caught out by the media. You see, if the media had been on the ball that day and seen 2 caskets loaded onto Air Force 2, that's going to look suspicious. So you need 2 people, 2 reports of 2 dead people to make that legitimate. So all you need to say then is this is the Secret Service man for the second casket, don't you? In actual fact, the body was probably in the trunk of a car and whisked somewhere else. We don't really know the answer to that, but that serves that purpose. Every angle here is covered. Every angle here is covered. And when we think about the deception and the level of deception and the level of planning that this evil scheme has just grown into, we can see now the depth to which these plotters have gone. All right. and I'm guessing that if you can kill the President of the United States, you can do anything, and you can do anything to cover it up. And this is the belief that they would have been under, and everything that happens from that point onwards is all about the cover up, the cover up, the cover up, the cover up. And so none of this can be exposed until we start investigating it and really looking at it from a different perspective. So I just wanted to talk to you about how that works and how that's happened, how it's come about, and to make absolutely clear that we all understand that Tippit was killed for his corpse. That was the reason behind it. Okay, they needed his corpse so that they could promote the lone assassin theory. Lee Harvey Oswald had nothing whatsoever to do with it, although he came into the knowledge that this is going to happen. Okay, and that Roscoe White and Gary Marlowe killed Tippit. No question about it. Okay, so that's just what I wanted to share with you in this video. And any questions you might have, please post them on our Facebook page, Oswald Not a Shooter, and read our book Takedown, because everything that I've talked about is in there. So it's lovely to chat to you, and I will chat soon.